It isn't every day one gets to introduce his grandson to the 35th largest Rotary Club in the world. My goodness. Phil Souser was born, raised, and educated in York. He graduated from York Suburban High School with honors, after which he attended Middlebury College in Vermont and graduated magna cum laude in 2009. And just last month, he received his master's degree from Pennsylvania State University. Bill's camp experience started at the age of 9. He continued there as a staff member to this day. It was on a day off that he and a small group got together and decided to lay the groundwork for this extended canoe trip. He'll tell you all the story today. Bill?
Thank you, Henry. And I thank all of you for having me this afternoon. I'm going to talk a bit about Expedition 2012, which is a canoe trip that 9 friends of mine and I undertook last year. In fact, last year at this time, we were on the Atchison River in Ontario, just a week away from Hudson Bay. But the easiest way to tell you about the trip, I think, is to tell you how it came to be. In the summer of 2009, as my grandfather mentioned, 4 of us were on a day off from KeewaydinCanoeExped in Vermont, and we were hiking in this valley in the Adirondacks. And on the way up the trail, we were saying to each other, you know, isn't it a shame that we're all Keewaydin alumni and we never get to actually trip together? You go out on a trip with 12 to 14-year-old kids and another staffman. And so there are only 2 adults on the trip at any one time. But we were all steeped in the tradition of Keewaydin and really wanted to trip together. And so we started with the idea that after the camp season in the summer, we could hike or paddle for maybe 4 days over in New York, somewhere like this. And then we took that idea and started to run with it. And the trip got longer and longer and bigger until after half an hour and about a mile of hiking, we came up with this, which is a canoeing expedition from Lake Dunmore, where Keewaydin is located in Salisbury, Vermont. From there to Lake Champlain and down to Montreal, and from there across Canada to James Bay, which is part of the Hudson Bay. In all, a 69-day, 1,200-mile canoe trip that we were going to undertake, building our own wood canvas canoes in order to do so. Sort of all happened very fast, so the trip itself would take a lot longer. As for why we wanted to do this, John McPhee, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author, himself a Keewaydin alumnus, wrote that travel by canoe is not a necessity, and it will never more be the most efficient way to get from one region to another, or even from one lake to another, anywhere. A canoe trip has become simply a rite of oneness with certain terrain, a diversion in the field, an act performed not because it is necessary, but because there is value in the act itself. And Keewaydin has a long tradition of undertaking these acts of value in the wilderness. They've been at this location on Keewaydin Dunmore, where I work. In fact, the staff training is starting this evening, and I'll be driving around there today. They've been there since 1910, and Keewaydin's green canoes have been flying the waters of Ontario since 1893. As my grandfather mentioned, I was a camp leader myself for 9 years. This will be my 8th summer on the staff, and I look forward to passing on all the experiences I have had to a new generation of campers, some of whom, thankfully, will be there because of scholarships. And we decided to undertake this journey in order to endow a scholarship fund for campers from underprivileged families to attend Keewaydin, which provides this wonderful outdoor setting that otherwise they may not be able to enjoy. And we successfully raised $218,000 last year in order for that to happen. Now, I enjoy teaching the new generation of campers, but really what I enjoy most about the time that I get to spend in the wilderness is how much I learn while I'm out there. thing we started doing was looking at a route across Canada. And this started in the winter of 2010, 2011. Obviously, 1,200 miles is a lot of paper to cover, even at a 1 to 250,000 scale, or even at a 1 to 56,000 scale, which I believe those maps are. So we spread all of them out on the floor of the Middlebury College Library one winter and tried to figure out where there were actually blue lines that crossed this continental landmass. And then there was boat building. This is one of my favorite parts of the project. We built our own wood canvas canoes. They're 17 feet 3 inches long. They're based on a Chestnut Canoe Company prospector model. Chestnut Canoe Company went out of business in 1979. Fortunately, that means that their models are available to us. And they are built of white and red cedar primarily. It takes about 2 weeks to build a boat like this. We have a video of it up on our website. But you steam the ribs and bend them over the form. You can see the ribs are those cross pieces, the sort of black and brown pieces there below where Nick is putting the nail. And those go on first. And the planking covers that afterward. These are those long strips, 18 feet long, in fact, of that's red cedar, sanded down to 5/32 of an inch. So it's a lot of milling and grinding and sanding. And if you don't know the machines, you probably are going to have to mill the planking twice, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times. And you make mistakes, but the boats, fortunately for us, turned out beautifully anyway. We were fortunate that Keewaydin has an alumnus who's a master in craftsman, Scott Thompson, who has a workshop in Connecticut and was able to really teach us a lot of his skills. Those are 2 other boats that we had already built shells of behind Nick. Once that wooden shell is complete, we actually stretch canvas over it and tack that on. Then you need 4 layers of epoxy and 4 layers of paint on top of that. Since they all take 24 hours to dry, that actually turns out to be the longest part of the project, is the epoxy and painting. Packing was also another huge logistical feat to accomplish. As you can see there, when packing out for a trip this length, you just have so much food. Pounds upon pounds of pasta and peanuts and pancake mix and anything you can imagine taking out on a camping trip. We took it. We were very fortunate in that we had several food companies who were sponsoring us. Dakin Farms of Vermont provided all of our bacon, for example, 40 pounds of it. And there were several other companies who helped us along the way, and we're very grateful for them. In addition to that, since this trip is 69 days long, we needed to split all of the food up into shipments that could be resupplied to us at any given point. So while we were packing for the first leg of our trip, we were also in fact packing for the second and third and the 5th legs of the trip. So we had to know exactly how much food we were going to need on day 55 a week before we even left, which was difficult, to say the least. But then on April 8th of 2012, we were able to depart Lake Dunmore. This is us 4 days later on Lake Champlain, working our way toward the Canadian border. And setting out on the trip was really when the adventure seemed to actually start. Even though we were still in Vermont, a place that was very familiar to us, we were experiencing it in a totally different way. And this is when I really started to learn a lot. So first lesson, have a plan. We started planning in 2010, and those 69 days of the trip actually took about 2.5 to 3 years to actually map out and figure out how we were going to accomplish our goals. So the plan is very important. For example, if you know that the Richelieu River is rocky in Canada, this is in Quebec, try to find a way around. Know that there's a canal right next to the bank. However, the best laid plans off go awry. So it would help to know, for example, that that canal is drained until May, and that it's 2 to 3 inches deep and full of horribly green, murky water that you really don't want to walk through. It would help if you had maps that were made after 1989 and could alert you to this possibility in a day where you should have had a river. Have a plan, but be prepared for it to change, and perhaps even change drastically. I have to say the people in this neighborhood had no idea what was going on. Lesson number 2. 2, there are some times when you just have to put your head down and force your way through. This is a log jam. It's not a particularly bad log jam, actually, in relation to some of the things we had to get over. This is on the East Whitefish River in northern Ontario, probably about day 49. So we were downstream at this point, ready to get to the bay. This would have been late May, and the bugs had emerged. But the river was only about 18 feet wide. And so if a tree falls in the forest, you're going to come across it in the water. And so are other trees, in fact. And so we came upon a lot of these, and there's really nothing you can do about a log jam like this except head to the bank, which fortunately isn't that far away, and cut yourself a portage trail to get around it. So some of our days involved a lot of scouting, a lot of walking, and zero paddling. This day, I believe we made a total of 3.5 miles. One of the hardest days of the trip, but that was all the head we made. But you just put your head down and force your way through. Similarly, if you were on a lake in Ontario and encountered ice in the morning, there's really not much you can do about it except plow your way through the ice. This was May 8th of last year on Lake Temiskaming. It had gotten very, very cold the night before, and we all looked out at the water and thought, what is that wind out on the lake? And then we got there and started crunching. And there was, in fact, ice on the surface of the lake. We got very lucky with the weather in general, but there were a few days that got very cold, very breezy, a little bit of snow, a little bit of ice. However, while there are some places you can put your head down and just force your way through, there are also places where force is not an option and forces that you can't reckon with. This is New Post Falls in northern Ontario, where the bottom just falls out of the creek, and although you can't see the entire waterfall there, it actually falls about 110 feet down to the bottom through this amazing cross and then down into the Mississippi River. So this was a wonderful place to take out a rest day, but not a great place to try to paddle. There are man-made forces that you also don't want to try to reckon with. For example, the Canada Steamship Line's Labrador, which is a 630-foot tanker, or container ship, sorry, that likes to ply the waters of the St. Lawrence Seaway. This is actually the part of the trip that I was most frightened of, going through all of the planning, was trying to paddle up the St. Lawrence Seaway, because it's a commercial canal, there's a lot of shipping that goes through there, it's right next to Montreal, it's right across the St. Lawrence River. And you sort of have to use it because the river at that point is several miles wide and encumbered by the Lachine Rapids, which are not really a viable option to paddle up. So we paddled on the seaway for half a day. It was very windy, so we had to take a break in the middle of it. It took us longer than we would have liked. But we did get to watch these steamships go by. In fact, if you sort of make that horn honking gesture that you would make toward the truck, the ship captains are very willing to give you the old shave and a haircut 2 bits line, which is fantastic. But not, of course, you want to reckon with. As you can imagine, these ships leave quite awake. So we crossed the St. Lawrence the day after this. It's about 5 miles wide at that point, but we got very lucky again with the weather. And we're able to paddle right across in calm, beautiful morning. Lesson number 3, there are some skills that with experience become much more enjoyable, such as portaging, which is the art of carrying a canoe on your shoulders. Everyone's first portage is ugly. It doesn't work out well. You think that there has to be a better way of doing it than the way that you've been shown. And everyone's first portage sort of goes the same way, which is that you try every way that you can think of other than the one that you've been told to do, and then you finally realize that the way you've been shown is the only way to do it. This is in downtown Ottawa, the capital of Canada. We reached Ottawa on day 17, and Pete and Rich here are portaging down a bike path around a dam in downtown Ottawa. So those of us who had a lot of experience portaging, who had done this since we were 12 or 13, had a fairly easy time with it. Some people had a more difficult time. Our friend Kyle had never portaged before when he came on the trip, and the first thing we had to do was carry our canoes out of Lake Dunmore, because Lake Dunmore doesn't actually have a viable waterway down to Lake Champlain. And some of us took our first trip along the road down to this power station where we were putting in. And then on the way back, we saw a blue expedition jacket in the woods. And Kyle had put his head down and just started portaging, determined that he was going to make it, and just followed the stream the whole way to the footing instead of walking on the road. And I can't imagine how much harder that must have been. So some skills get easier with experience. However, there are some experiences for which skill isn't going to help you at all. Such as riding out a hailstorm 2 hours later in downtown Ottawa. There's just really nothing any of us can do at that point. No matter how many hailstorms you have been through, it wasn't going to help at this point. Lesson number 4, self-sufficiency is intensely satisfying. It's wonderful to be out on these bodies of water knowing that you've gotten there by your own motive power only, that you don't need anyone to help you get from point A to point B, even when point B happens to be 1,200 miles away. Now, this photo was taken on day 3, so we weren't sure of that yet, but we really enjoyed the feeling of being in a campsite with no one else around. It was early April, so obviously no one is out on Lake Champlain yet at that time of year. It was wonderful to have it to ourselves, to just sort of kick back and feel like we were in the wilderness, even when the town of Plattsburgh is actually just around the point there. However, if that's so satisfying, you don't turn down a floating bunkhouse if somebody offers it. We were very fortunate in the 3rd week of our trip to come into a town called Norway Bay. And this is an English-speaking enclave of Quebec, right on the Ottawa River. And Peter and Barbara Houghton happened to be in the park that morning as we paddled up, and it was a very cold, very windy morning. There was ice forming on our paddles and on our boats as we were paddling up the river. And they said, well, you know, we're only 4 kilometers upstream if you'd like to stay with us. And we had thought that we'd like to get a lot further that day, 4 kilometers upstream from this town. And so we sort of politely declined and didn't really say yes or no, but we were planning on paddling further. However, it was very, very cold that day. So we ended up spending a long time over lunch making some hot soup. And before lunch was over, Peter and Barbara came back and said, listen, we have this floating bunkhouse that we reconstructed. It's a 19th century logging barge that lumbermen would have slept in while they were timbering on the Ottawa River in the 1880s. And we really couldn't turn that down. There were 8 bunks inside. There's a fully functional wood stove, and this floats in the bay right across from Cotton's house. So we really appreciated their gesture of hospitality. And all along the way, we had such amazing gestures of hospitality from the local population. It was fantastic. People opening their homes, their yards, providing food. It was really phenomenal. And the friendliness of the communities along the river there is one of the parts of the trip that I'll remember most. And probably the most unique lesson I can offer from Expedition 2012 is to enjoy the scenery, because there's a lot of it. We went through 1,200 miles. Not all of it was wilderness, but a significant amount of it was. And while paddling like that, you encounter the landscape at such a slow pace that you really get to see and experience all of it around you, to interact with it in a way that car travel certainly does not allow. And that train and rail and air travel also would not allow. And you just go so slowly through this land that it's an entirely different experience. You hear the slap of the beaver's tail at night. You can hear the geese waking in the morning. The wildlife is truly phenomenal. And so I would say this last lesson, enjoy the scenery, but be aware that you can only ride a moose when it is swimming. Advised not to try this when the moose is on land. However, moose are not fantastic swimmers. Not what they're known for. And if you jump onto their back while they're in the middle of a river, they really can't throw you off. Now you can tell that the moose is a little discomfited by this, but it really doesn't harm him. And this is another tradition that Keewaydin had, actually. We had heard as children, when I was 9 or Speedy Rush, the director of Keewaydin from 1940 to 1945, had ridden the moose when he was a young man in the 1920s, up in Ontario somewhere, and that he had jumped on it while it was in the water and just grasped it by the ears and rode on. And so I, in turn, passed this knowledge along to my campers, fully confident that it was a lie. In fact, it was not a lie, as I was surprised to find out, but we tested the theory, and in fact, riding a moose is fully possible if the moose is swimming in deep water. Fortunately, the Abitibi River here is right behind the dam, so you know that the water is very deep and that you're very far from the shore, about 400 yards in either direction. So there was no worry of the moose touching down as we swam, and this actually, interestingly enough, was June 5th of 2012, so a year ago today. Really a fantastic experience all around to participate in one of these legends that we had heard of for so long ago, even as we were sort of making our own story for the future. And Keewaydin's season this summer for 2013 is starting today, so I'm looking forward to participating in that future, even today and tomorrow. So I thank you very much for your attention and your time. Thanks for having me. Certainly. The question was, can I say a word about the charity that I raised the money for? The money went to the Keewaydin Foundation, which runs the summer camp that I attended in Souser, Vermont, on Lake Dunmore. They also run an all-boys camp in Temagami, Ontario, and they run 2 all-girls camps that go along with each of those. They run a Center for Environmental Education that teaches local children about the area around them in the spring and fall in Vermont. And we raised $218,000, which will endow a scholarship for campers at one of those 4 summer camps moving forward. They've been in operation since 1893. Every summer we have about 220 campers in Vermont at any given time at boys camp, about 120 at the boys camp in Ontario. So about 500 campers at any one time between all 4 camps. And we look forward to another century at least. Yes?
Where did you get the donation?
The donations came in large part from Camp Alumni. It's a really wonderful community of people who have attended these camps, and they're very proactive in supporting the future. There were some tense moments on the trip. I won't try to hide that. We are all still talking. We all worked at Keewaydin again last summer after we got back. We actually paddled in and then had 2 days off and then started the summer. Most of the crew, believe it or not, are now working in New York City. So it's been quite a shift in the year for them. A few of us are still remaining on staff at Keewaydin, but we're the teachers. Everyone else works in some sort of office in New York. So probably no trips in the future.
You have a new master's in the future.
I actually will be teaching at the Roland Park Country School in Baltimore starting next year. I actually have been subbing for the end of the school year this year, so I'm very much looking forward to that. It's a very fun environment. Very good question. And it's one that we ask a lot. The Ottawa River is a significant one. It's the 6th largest river in Canada, so its flow is significant, and you feel that paddling upstream a lot of the time. Really, that's the only way to get from point A to point B is to go upstream. But I will tell you, it was a fantastic experience being on the hiking plan where you come up to the top of the water and then you cross over on a portage trail into the next lake, and you know that everything is downstream from there. As it turned out, everything was actually more difficult from there because the water is smaller, but it's a nice feeling anyway. Yes?
Did you say you did the round trip or just one way and then got back?
Oh, one way. Just one way. We weren't going to turn around and then go upstream again. Actually, when we get to Moosonee, which is the village at which we finished, get back to the map. So we finished at Moosonee on the James Bay up there. And when you get there are no roads to Moosonee. There's a railroad that got there in 1934, and it's called Polar Bear Express. And we took the Polar Bear Express from Moosonee back to Cochrane, Ontario, which is approximately where that yellow star, if you can see it, to the left of Lake Abitibi is. So that's a couple hundred miles upriver from Moosonee. And we drove back from there. And it's a little disheartening to do the whole of your 69-day trip in a 5-hour train trip and then 14 hours of driving. There were 10 of us all told, representing a grand total of 89 years experience at Keewaydin and 45 years on the staff. So we're all pretty indebted to that camp for who we are today. 2 per canoe, yes. It's a 17-foot boat. There's a bow seat and a stern seat, and there's room for about 600, 700 pounds of gear in addition to people. You know, we earnestly debated that question before we left. And I think that everyone agreed that there were certain people they couldn't paddle in a boat with for 70 days. But it was very nice the way we balanced it out. We left on day 1 with 5 boat pairs, and we came back on day 69 with the same boat partners. And through, I guess, luck and planning and a bit of emotional resilience, we made it through. If by chopper you mean my father Craig or somebody else's parents, then yes, but they drove. Interestingly, the last resupply was at that yellow star near Lake Abitibi, and that's about where the roads end. So my dad and my brother came up on day 54 and resupplied us there, and after that we were on our own until day. Thanks very much.